Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I have a very near and dear guest. I have somebody who I've worked with in the past. I'm excited to have on the podcast. I've a certified athletics trainer, Melissa Perkins, is joining us today.
Hello.
I was going to call you Melissa there, and I just could not make it happen. Perks, I know Perks is Perks. Perks worked with me when I was coaching volleyball. She was the athletic trainer for our team at that time. So we've traveled a lot together and worked very closely together in the past. And I will forever know her as Perks. Even after she's married and has a different last name, it'll still just be Perks.
I don't think I'm taking it, so I'll be Perks forever.
There we go. We're getting... This is unplanned to record in the podcast. Tuba Tom becoming a Perkins? Is that just we're just
I wish. I'm always trying, and it is Tuba Tom season. We have stickers galore. The beer is
out. Perk's significant other is a brewer, works at a brewery. And so, weren't there t-shirts or was that just like that's amazing.
Yeah.
You could be Tuba Melissa Perkins. Just take it as like a prefix.
He can be the band nerd for the both of us.
This is coming from a certified licensed marriage and family therapist giving some official couples advice. So if Tom wants some backup, I got him. Cool. Perks, let's talk about athletes and mental health and athletic trainers' mental health, because that's going to be part of our conversation too. How'd you get into athletic training? What was the draw? Give us a little bit of your background and how you got to be where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up an athlete. I've played softball my whole life. I actually went to boarding school for high school. So it was a full math and science academy, all nerds. Everyone knew exactly what they wanted to be. They're like, I want to cure cancer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a scientist. I want to do physics. And I was like, ooh, I have no idea what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I wound up getting to know our high school athletic trainer and worked with him a little bit. And he kind of gave me some insight. But I wasn't fully sold yet. I was like, I want to go to PT school. I think that's a good fit for me. And, if the college I choose has AT, like maybe I'll pursue that. So then I wound up going to Concordia University, Wisconsin. I played softball there. And from my first day of clinicals, I just fell in love. I knew that I loved being on the sideline and working with teams, but still getting to do the medical side of it and kind of solving puzzles while also helping people. And so I really just kind of fell in love with it as I went on there. From there, I did an internship at Division I, and then I did grad school at Division I. And really, I feel like my passion has just continued to grow. But I have seen a lot of need for mental health in athletics that I don't think was really discussed a bunch when I was in school. Like, even I was on a team for 4 years, and I can't pick out one of my teammates really being open or struggling with mental health. And I graduated in 2016, so it really wasn't that long ago. But to really be so deeply intertwined with athletics as we are as an athletic trainer, I've really seen it change a lot. And it's one of my passions in terms of athletic training. And I'm really lucky to have worked at the institutions I have that have put a high value on that.
Yeah, for sure. Your experience with the high school trainer sounds positive. Were you dealing with some injury stuff then in your career?
Not as much. Luckily, I've stayed pretty healthy. I had a few little injuries in high school, but nothing that kept me out for more than a couple days. And then again, in college, I just had shoulder pain here and there as a pitcher, but nothing that really kept me out long term. But I have had like teammates that I've seen kind of go through longer term injuries and kind of see how much it affects them. And so that's something that I've been able to take with me, is even though I haven't had to sit out for anything, I have seen other people go through it and how hard it can be.
Yeah. And I had a terrible, I'm older than you, so maybe the profession has improved. It might just be my little private school I went to had a bad trainer, but I had a trainer who popped out one of my shoulders and then was like, that shouldn't happen. And then proceeded to do it with the other shoulder because he was experimenting, I guess. So trainer Troy from back in the day, my nemesis. Athletic trainers are super awesome. And as somebody who's worked highly highly close with them, both on mental health and then as a coach of my team, super great. Like any profession, similar to therapy too, if having a bad trainer can be a miserable experience versus having a trainer who's a good fit, who's really listening to you and working with you. So I don't mean to disparage the profession. I hold it very highly. I personally had a bad high school experience for sure. It's high school trainers.
Yeah, there's plenty out there that kind of give us a bad rap, and it's really hard to kind of bridge the gap of working with athletes that don't really respect what you do as much because they have a bad experience. So you have to do twice the work of rebuilding that relationship, letting them know that like not only do you know what you're doing, but you also care about them and you value their opinion. Because I've worked in places where I've kind of had to redo what the person before me had done. So if we have fully different like treatment styles and getting a new person to really buy in, especially I tend to be a lot more like rehab based and like do your exercises. Other people tend to just do like feel good stuff. And so convincing someone that like exercises that are hard and can sometimes be painful are going to be better for you than sitting on a stim machine for 15 minutes and then still going out to practice and doing the same things over and over again. So really a lot of it is that relationship building, much like therapy. You need someone to buy in, you need someone to believe what you're saying and what you're doing to get the results that you want.
Yeah. So let's talk some of the sports specific stuff. You're working with football.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things, what's a challenge of working with like a stereotypical macho type sport like that when you're looking for things like mental health, or you're looking for somebody who's maybe struggling with their mental health while they're injured? Like, how do you relationship building with the individual, but in your role, how do you kind of bridge that gap maybe to a culture that is rub some dirt on it, or like get back in there and play through it? Like, how do you kind of bridge that gap?
It has been really difficult, honestly. I think finding members of our staff that maybe isn't the head coach or maybe isn't a coordinator, but maybe some of the younger assistant coaches that have a little bit more understanding has been really helpful. So here at my institution, we have a cares team, which are a few individuals within our whole department that are a little bit better trained in like our mental health action plan and basically just willing to like put our name and number on a magnet. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Obviously, we're not your therapist, but we can connect you to the correct resources. So I'm a member, but we also have one of our football coaches who is. So he's been a really good resource for me of if football players don't necessarily want to talk to me, I can kind of throw his name out there and be like, hey, he understands your sport. He understands what's going on. Like, feel free to talk to him and know that like it can stay between you and you can kind of get the help that you need. But it is really difficult to try and encourage these athletes to get what they want, or encourage them to get services, even if maybe they don't want it or they're not totally open to it, because I think it is really hard. I will say that even working with a men's team for the first time in a while, I've noticed a huge difference in generations. So our freshmen, our sophomores are way more open to talking about this and being open and honest and saying, I need this, or, you know, that's not working for me. And so I think that's a big culture shift, that like we're working in a sport that's so used to like suck it up, right? But seeing younger athletes being like, no, like that's not an appropriate response, or that's not helpful to me, and being able to kind of speak up for themselves is a really, really interesting dynamic change that I'm very happy with. Obviously, I'm very glad that we're seeing this shift, but it still is really hard, like you said, to kind of bridge that gap between them and some of the coaching staff and the rest of the department.
Yeah. And I don't want to dip into ageism here. I will maybe I'll brush up against it, but like some of that old school mentality and some of those older coaches, like I remember even in my role working as specifically a mental health person for athletes and being like, you can't have your kids bag skate. And for those people who don't know what bag skating is, it's basically making your players skate for ice hockey, skate until they puke. Which is bad. Like that's not healthy for them. But like that's the culture in some of these sports, is like, well, there are consequences if you lose, there are consequences if you skip practice or you're late or whatever. So like, here's a punishment, and realizing and working to change some of the cultures around those things, being like, that's not healthy. We've had athletes over the past couple of years who have died on the punishment runs. We've had people who have, you know, so we've seen like the negative outcomes, and those have existed since the 80s. Like that's not new. It's just, it's talked about differently now. And I think that culture shift starts, in my opinion, with coaches. But yes, definitely athletes, Gen Z and younger, are much better about advocating for themselves and knowing that mental health is a thing. So it'll be interesting, I think, as coaches to start to get younger and younger. You see it in the professional ranks, and it always takes a little bit longer to filter to D1, D2, D3, kind of in that order. And then
Yeah.
I would say in the club coaching scene too, I see a lot of young coaches who are much more savvy with it than some of the older scream at your players until they're crying in the huddle type coaches. I see that. It still exists, unfortunately, but I see it less.
Yeah, I have an interesting dichotomy too, because I work football in the spring and then I work softball or football in the fall and softball in the spring. And my softball coach is like the most precious baby angel, God's gift to this world, like just phenomenal, supportive human being. They have a like well-known policy that it's you can take a mental health day, no questions asked. Like mental health comes before school, comes before athletics. Like athletics should be the bottom of your priority list. And so just seeing that type of like culture and environment, and we still win games. We still won a conference championship last year. Very similar to when I was with you guys with volleyball, right? Like you can be nice and be understanding and still shape athletes and push them to be great and not have to kind of take that hard ass route all the time. Like you can be nice and they will still respect you. And I think that that's what's really hard to kind of understand sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting too. Like, I don't know if you experienced this, but my experience as a coach, a lot of it was filtered through doing opposite of what I was coached. Like every single coach I had in my life, I played baseball growing up. I played volleyball at the University of Minnesota. Like every single coach I've had in my life got in my face and screamed at me. And like I, as an athlete, don't respond to that. Like I shut down, like, fuck you. Like I'm going to play poorly just to keep pissing you off because I'm mad at you, which isn't a mature response. But like, so me coaching was like, I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to yell at people. I'm not going to get in their space. Like we're going to talk through things. And like, yes, I'm cheating. I'm a therapist, but like, do you experience that with like athletic training where it's like, right, you've filtered some of your experience through the good coaches you've had and then working to not do what the bad coaches you've had did?
A little bit, yeah. And I think for me too, like obviously being a female athlete, my first couple jobs, I worked with primarily female athletes for like 4 years. So now coming here and working football, it is a very big shift, even for me, like personality wise, because there are some football guys where if I'm too nice, they'll walk all over me. Like I know that I need to kind of like buck up a little bit in a way and be firm and set those boundaries and set those expectations and give them consequences if things aren't being met. But my consequences are you're not going to get better, right? Like for me,
Yeah.
I don't really see much in terms of making someone run because they don't show up to treatments. If you don't care enough about your body to get better, then I don't either. Like I'm going to check out. It's not worth my time if it's not worth yours. But definitely my personality shifts a little bit where I have a little bit higher expectations and firmer boundaries with football players because they need those.
Sure.
And if they don't have them, like they're just not meeting like if you don't give them a timeline, if you don't give them a deadline, like they're just kind of going to float through space. So I can tell that my personality shifts a little bit, but I've never been a yeller. Like I've never like been an aggressive because I know that doesn't work for me, right? If I get into a confrontation with someone, whether it's an athlete, a coach, a coworker, like I'm going to cry. I really wish I wouldn't. Like I'm so frustrated that knowing that I care about something and have a lot of emotions and know that I'm right a lot of times, my body's natural reaction is to cry. And it just makes me look so weak. But as like a woman in a position of power in this department, I try so hard to try and like keep my composure and keep that kind of like firmness. But yeah, it's I try to be better than people I've worked with because I've also had people that I've just kind of learned in the past too about being like either too nice or like too joking or too goofy. And so I've kind of like found that balance that I think works best for me.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing when you're working with athletes because they need different things from you, different like that's something I had no frame of reference for, maybe because I was like head in the clouds, not a surprise as an athlete myself, but like as a coach, you learn how so many different athletes approach things differently. And so like for me, like winning was always the natural motivation, but there's so many athletes who are motivated by their teammates being happy or their parents being happy, which I would say is unhealthy. But like, you know, there's different things. So like one athlete might need, hey, like this is going to get you back to being on the field sooner. One athlete might need, hey, this is going to make you feel better. This is going to help you sleep or get back into the classroom or whatever. So like your role is figuring out not like my way or the highway, but figuring out how do I help this kid? How do I meet this kid where they're at so that they can meet their goals?
Absolutely. And goals is a big thing. So especially when we get to like our long-term cases or people that are like really struggling to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, goal setting is something that we really use a lot to try and be like, maybe it is just a goal of like, you can shower standing up and not be in pain, right? Like you don't need to use a shower stool anymore, or you can walk to class without crutches or something like that. Like these small little goals for some people are, I mean, I have a kid who's been in a cast post-surgical for 4 weeks and he just is now switched to a boot. He still can't walk on it, but like that excitement was like such a big deal where I'm like, hey, now you get to scratch your foot when it itches. Like, isn't that exciting? And he's like, yeah, it really is. Like you can shower. Like these like little things just to keep giving them, especially some of these surgical where it's like such long-term, 6 to 9 months, like giving them those like little wins along the way is what that person needs. Whereas maybe another person is like, can you play football today? Like that's the question. And if you can, cool, like we'll deal with it later. We'll figure these things out along the way. So it really is just so different person to person, sport to sport, gender to gender, like all of these things is really interesting to kind of see these differences in athletes.
Yeah. What's kind of the shift right now in the field of athletic training as on a professional level? What's maybe getting normalized or talked about more around mental health? Because I know there are shifts going on. You said you graduated in 2016 and like as an athlete, it wasn't talked about, but now as a professional, what are you kind of seeing the fields wrestling with, whether that's the NCAA or even your specific schools that you've worked with? What are you kind of seeing?
Yeah, I think a lot of places have made a good shift towards, I feel like a lot of it is just breaking the stigma and just trying to talk about it a little bit more. So I'm on the CARES team, but I'm also on an athlete wellness committee. So it's a combination between me, our director of like athlete wellness, who does more of the mental health side, one of our track coaches who's a nutritionist, and then our strength and conditioning lead. And so just kind of getting all of our opinions and trying to put them together where maybe it's not even just mental health, but just athlete wellness in general. Like, how are they feeling? What's the, like, keeping our finger on the pulse in a way of like what athletes are doing and how they're feeling has been really helpful. So I think us specifically, that's been a great opportunity, but athletic training in general, it's just a lot more talking about it. But I think the problem is like, we're going to hit a point where we plateau, right? Like we're not counselors. We're not licensed therapists. We can have all the information in the world of like where to send them next, but that's really all I can do at a certain point, right? Like I can recognize these things. I can be open and have my door open and say all these things and say like, I believe you, I support you. What else can I do to help you? But like, that's going to tap out at a certain point. So I feel like there's so much information coming into the world for athletic trainers, whether it's through NCAA and like the Gatorade Science Institute is doing like a mental health series and all of these things. And I just keep like joining in all of these webinars. And I just feel like this is the same thing I've already got. So I feel like the issue is the people that care and that are trying have plateaued and kind of tapped out on how much more information or how many more things we can do, or like posters to put up or lectures to host or groups to put together. And it's just, if athletes don't want to do it, there's only so much we can do. Like even now we have like you can host all these things, but if athletes don't want to go, like there's only so much. And so I think that's kind of the issue in athletic training. And then on the other side of it, you have people that aren't trying, aren't caring, aren't changing any of their ways. So I think we're just kind of splitting into this like little bit tapped out in what we can do, and then not really caring to do much more or move forward.
Yeah. And I think this will segue nicely into another topic, but self-care for the professionals. But, you know, the difference between a D1 sports program and a D3 sports program is like, they're not comparable. They're comparable because it's sports, but like when you're looking at budget and resources, like it's fantastic. You're at a D3 program, you have a nutritionist. Like that's so good.
We are incredibly lucky. And I feel like that's part of the thing is me personally, I've chosen institutions that I know have that type of support system because I value that so much in conjunction with my care as a healthcare provider. But I also worked at a small NAIA school where it was me and two like graduate assistants that we were just there for 6 hours a day. I never even really met the counselor, and it was one person for the entire campus. We had no one that talked about it in sports. We had not very much at all. So I choose to kind of put myself in these situations because at Concordia, the same thing. Like I knew that we had a little bit more support. It was talked about. We had a larger staff. more money, that kind of thing. But most D3 schools do not have what we have. And so I'm very blessed with what we have, but it really is a problem that I think that I listened to your last podcast of the director from Marquette, and I'm like, yeah, D1, that's great. I'm so excited that you have all that. But like, I mean, there's D2 schools that don't even have more than 2 athletic trainers, let alone any of these other staff members. So I think just getting these resources to schools, money is just, that's not where it goes. It's like the hardest problem.
Yeah. Well, and it's stigma on not just getting athletes to participate, but also, right, like I experienced as a director, like trying to secure funding and like coming out of COVID, that was a nightmare. And like, so all these things, like when we're looking at it as athlete wellness, there's that stigma around mental health, but like, what does sleep hygiene do for an athlete? Like a kid who's staying up late, cramming for a test, stressed about school is not going to perform as well as a kid who's well rested. And like, that's obvious to people who know that stuff, but that's not the culture that's promoted on most college campuses. Most of it's normalized. You're not going to get a ton of sleep and you're going to cram for tests, and that's normal. And like, yo, that's not healthy. We got to stop.
Yeah.
So I think looking at a wellness perspective is really key, and a holistic approach for like, how does this entire athlete, like a D1 program has a dentist on staff, like what's like, that's so great, but also if you're Ohio State and you're making $1 billion in profit off of your football program, you can afford to do that versus a school that's struggling to break even.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even now we're still dealing with budget stuff, like as big of a staff and as much stuff we have going on, there's still things that we want to do that we're being told no. And so you just have to kind of make do and figure out with what you got. And we are lucky to have a big staff, but right now we are covering every sport. So even I have football all week. Friday night is normally my night off because it's the night before a game, and I have a softball game to cover. And so we're all spread so thin that not only are we trying to take care of those athletes and take care of other teams and all of our off-season sports, but then try and find time to take care of ourselves too.
Yeah, let's talk about that. No, I get to go in. I still get invited in to talk every semester about mental health. So helping students who are studying athletic training to know kind of what to look for and how to refer appropriately. But also like I make a point to talk about self-care because I think it's a thing that isn't talked about enough. It's one of those professions that has like we're the first ones on campus and the last ones to leave. And that's good somehow.
Yeah. I hate it.
Yeah. It's a podcast, so y'all can't see this, but Perks just rolled her eyes real hard.
Well, I also hate that. I did a seminar this summer for like women leaders in athletics, and even the host of it were like, get there before your boss, stay later, work more for less money, don't ask about salary. Like, and I was like, what are we saying? And like, we did a little breakout group and all the girls in the group were like, yeah, we don't agree with that. Right. Like this person's like, I might be moving across the country for a job. I need to know if I can live on that money and like things like that. And so I think athletic training as a whole, luckily we are pushing for like more money to kind of offset the hours. But like, I've been working 60 to 70 hours a week since August 7th. Like right now I'm in the middle of a push where I have like 3 weeks without a day off. And normally my day off is I only have to go to football for 2 hours, not a true day off. So
yeah.
And so we're in the thick of it. And I'm very lucky to have like an assistant athletic trainer. So we have 2 people working football. So I do get some mornings off that I chose to teach as well, which, you know, that was interesting choice on my part. But so I think it's as much as we want more money, I think we just need to kind of change the idea of what we expect of athletic trainers, because there's just so much that we are expected to do, right? Like we're expected to be there and do rehab and treatments in the morning. I'm expected to set these doctor's appointments, make sure that their insurance covers the doctor's appointments, talk to parents when they have questions about insurance or them not getting better, then prep all the water for an 85-degree football practice in October, then cover 2 hours of practice, stay for 45 minutes while they all do the ice tubs, write all my notes to make sure that's up to date. And then some days I have meetings because I'm an administrator and we have drug testing. And so it's just like, there's so much that's put on our plate that like, the most frustrating part is how much people outside of athletics don't even know what we do. Like, that's really the uphill battle of, I get that my football coach knows how long I'm here, how much work I'm putting in, but like, a thank you is not a raise. And I think dealing with the like salary battle for how much work and stress and all this stuff that we're under, that's been the most difficult part in athletic training. People because you're not paying well enough, and then having the stress of being shorthanded and trying to replace, and like not stressing your other employees who probably aren't getting paid enough. And it's a very vicious cycle right now in the world of athletic training.
Yeah, and as much as we can talk about wellness for the athlete, wellness for the provider as well, because it's staffing across the board, like athletic training, I see it in nursing. I work with a ton of healthcare providers, which like athletic training is under that umbrella, but it's specialized, I guess. But like it's a thing in nursing. There's one strike going on right now for Kaiser Healthcare, which is a large healthcare provider in the nation. So it's like these it's not money. It is money, but it's really more about like quality of life. Like it's being able to have a day off, being able to rest and recuperate, to be able to show up for your athletes and not miss a diagnosis or not miss something because you're just burned out or you're sleep deprived or you got back from travel late or whatever it looks like. There's so many things that if we want to provide well for the athletes, we need providers to be taken care of as well. So like it gets back to support and looking at kind of a systemic or holistic approach instead of well, this is just the number in the budget, so that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I am lucky with the staff that we have, that I know that like this summer I bought concert tickets for next Wednesday, and there was not a question in my mind whether or not I'd be able to go. I was like, I have 8 employees. Someone can sit out at football practice and like I can go do this thing that I want to do. Or I have a couple weddings, like I'm able to kind of like figure it out. And so we are very lucky with the staff that we have, but just because it's not as bad as other people doesn't mean it's perfect. So, and that's what's really hard, is just trying to find that balance, and then add on top of it my work and stress, and also taking care of 8 athletic trainers under me and making sure that like their needs are being met and they're getting their time off that they need, while we're covering like 20 sports at the same time right now.
Yeah. And like your work is sometimes it's wrapping an ankle, but sometimes it's delivering bad news to a kid that they're going to miss the rest of the season, or dealing with a kid who's in their senior year who's not getting to play because they're injured. Like there's an emotional toll to what you do as well. It's not just, hey, know all this stuff, know how to do these things. There's the relationship building, and there's the time spent to have those relationships, and there's working with kids through difficult stuff. Like being injured sucks and takes a big toll on people emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, well, especially when I don't know what else to do to help you. Like, that's the hardest thing, is I'm like, you have had the scans, you've had the injections, you've had all these things, and nothing's helping. So now we come down to, do you want to play your sport? And if you do, I will try my best to control your pain, but like, I don't know how else to help you or how else to fix you. And like, there's nothing more defeating to me than someone coming in and being like, yeah, I'm in a lot of pain today. And me being like, okay, well, which of the like 5 things that we've thrown at the wall and none of them stuck, do you want to try again and see if it helps? Like, and so just kind of dealing with that like never ending frustration, where like sometimes in football injuries pop up and they get better and they go back and we kind of move on. And then other times in any of my sports, it's just very cyclical of like good days and bad days. And I mean, even now, like softball doesn't even play until the spring, and I have athletes that I'm like, all right, well, we're only going to get you through 7 more months. And that is very taxing. Every time they walk in, I feel like a little disappointed or a little defeated, and then try not to carry that into the appointment or like throughout the rest of the day, and just be like, how can I still show up for them when I'm frustrated and they're frustrated? Like, one of us has to pick up the slack today. If you're having a bad day, like that's on me to either play some fun music in the training room or switch it up and have it be like a fun day of rehab, or maybe just sit there and talk about how much it sucks, right? And so really finding time to still connect with people when I have maybe 10 other football players across the room or something like that, I think can be really hard too, where it's like you want to be there for them, but you only have so much bandwidth at any given time, and I'm only here for so many hours a day.
Just shaking my head at it. And it's one of those things where, again, I think you brought it up, like the football coach might know these things, but the athletic director probably doesn't. The random fan in the stands definitely doesn't know it. Like I would say even professional sports, most people don't know, like it's not a guaranteed that they all have athletic trainers at the professional level, but like mental health providers is still a new profession. Like the Packers have one person on staff for mental health. The NFL has billions of dollars to help athletes find people and providers, but like again, it's slowly becoming normalized, but that starts at the professional level, then goes to D1, and then like we're really not super seeing this stuff at D2 or D3 yet.
We'll catch up eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
I'll be working in the clinic, and who knows?
Well, and again, like you talked about the turnover, I think some of that is like, right. Some of it is the burnout cycle is problematic. Like I see this with social workers, I see it with nurses, I see it with other things. Like we're taking people who are passionate about it, coming out of school, have good training on it, and then are only in it for 5 years before they're going to go take a job at a hospital. Like I have a cousin who's an athletic trainer who's selling ankle braces because he makes so much more as a salesperson.
More than me.
Yeah. And like, you know, he likes sports and he's interested in doing what he's doing, and like he's good at what he does, but it's just one of those things, like you have kids or you go through a life transition and you have to make that cost benefit analysis make sense for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the burnout is tough, especially in college athletics. I would say that is probably the hardest, because high school, it's a lot, you're dealing with a lot of people, but most of those high school athletic trainers aren't going in until 1 or 2. Whereas like we open at 8 a.m. every day, and I am not leaving until 7:15. And granted, I don't do all of the 8 a.m.s, but like still just knowing that like, I mean, today I got here at 7:45 and I'm not going to leave until 7:15 tonight. And that's like a normal Wednesday. So dealing with that versus a clinic, you go in, work 8 to 4, you get your nights off, you get to hang out with family, and those clinic positions pay better. Like it's hard to avoid. I think looking back to, I graduated with 19 other athletic trainers in my class, and I'm the only one still actively working in athletic training. They are all either, there's some PT, there's like a firefighter, someone's working at like a stretch lab up in Wisconsin. And I'm like, and she still probably makes more than me. Like it's one of those things that like people have just slowly trickled away. And as much as I still have the passion for it, it's really hard to like push through the burnout, especially at a time like this, right? The heart of football season, I've spent maybe 5 conscious hours with my fiance in the last week. And half of that's cleaning my house or cooking dinner or staring at my dog saying, I'm sorry, I'm too tired to go play fetch with you right now.
Yeah. Well, and it's again, like I think there's a difference between in season and out of season.
Absolutely.
But when you're short staffed, you don't get that break. You don't get that out of season break if you're having to cover a sport or somebody leaves. And now we got 5 trainers covering 1 trainer who left unexpectedly. And like, so again, it gets back to that support. If our staffing is not good enough, you're going to have to pick up the slack somewhere.
Absolutely. Or you're going to have to bend in your coverage. And that's the thing is like right now, because we've covered every practice, we travel with every team. If we were to lose any staff members or be short staffed going into another year, like, I'm sorry, like we can't go to every basketball game on the road. And like the coaches are going to be upset because that's a huge selling point for our school and like their team. It's nice to have your own athletic trainer who knows everyone and can handle everything correctly. But like, there's going to be a point where it's not going to work anymore. Yeah. And again, I think people, non-professionals have a weird view of it because you see the NBA game or the NFL game where the training staff comes running on the field and they're just on the sidelines and like they're there all the time. Like that's not normal outside of a professional setting. Correct. Yeah. We're very lucky that we get to travel places, but if they're playing a game, that means there is an athletic trainer there. It just might not be yours. Right. And so I think just kind of giving it, and especially in the NCAA, every coach is CPR certified. So like in an emergency, you can handle it. I've worked at a place where coaches had to kind of deal with injuries until we came in the next day. And like, it can happen. So I feel like we always have to remind them not to take advantage or like forget that we are very lucky to have the setup that we have. And that's pretty common across all like D3 schools of like we have a large staff. That is a huge selling point for us. And so just kind of remembering that like we need to be taken care of too, even though there's this many of us, it's still tough work.
Yeah. So I know you and I have talked, and I'm going to share a little bit of some things we've talked about in the past, but like changing a job for you was good for your mental health. Like getting that reset, you said being very intentional for picking employers who are going to support you the way that you need to be supported. Like, can you talk a little bit about that experience of like, I remember texting with you and being like, I believe you said pretty much word for word, my mental health has done a 180. So like,
yeah. So I think for me, when I was choosing to leave Concordia, that was the biggest thing. It was a really hard decision. I was very happy there. I was very comfortable there. And then once COVID hit, I kind of had a different perspective because that time was really hard. It was fall of 2020. We were pushing athletes back into sport, and I was having a huge like moral dilemma of like, are we doing this to help the athletes? Or are we doing this to keep them on campus, keep their tuition, keep the school open, keep our jobs? So that was very hard on me mentally. And I remember it vividly. Like there was a day where I hit the point where I was just like, I don't know, if you're ever in like such a like depressed mood where you just say whatever the fuck you want because you're like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, what are the consequences? And one of my coworkers was like, wow, like Perkins, you are on one today. And I was like, it's called depression. Like, get used to it. And they were just like dying laughing at me. And I was like, yeah, it's really funny. I'm really sad. And so I was also in a long distance relationship at the time. So that was a huge factor as well. So I was living with my best friend and her girlfriend. So just like seeing love every day while like knowing that I was away from my partner. And then really struggling at work. I was like, I need to make a change. And so that was a huge factor of like why I started looking for other jobs. And I moved back here, and that was when I went to an NAIA school. So it was like you come in 10 to 6 every day, except for games. Like it was a very set schedule. It was the perfect like reset for me. And then I got to move in with Tom, and so like that was great. And so that really was like a huge 180. And I was happy there, but I was missing I liked traveling. I liked getting to know my athletes a little bit better. So instead of going to practices, we just kind of sat in the training room and had people come to us if something came up. So I wasn't getting that same like connection that I had had at some of my other jobs. And then we found out that school was closing. And so when they closed, I wound up here, which it's a very familiar vibe. It's very similar to the way Concordia ran. And so I think for me, like, this has been the best fit. And I am very happy here. My mental health is a lot better. I'm obviously like exhausted and burnt out in football season, but like I know that I'm off in winter. So like come November 12th, I will be in a much better mood. I get my summers off. So as much as I like kind of harp on like how I feel right now, I do have a really, really good work-life balance in general. So football's tough, but football's tough everywhere. Like that, it is what it is. I'm still excited to come to work. I'm not at the point of absolutely dreading it. Some Sundays I tend to dread it, like a JV game on a Sunday. That'll get me to be like, okay, we're doing it. Like, let's go one more day.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is relevant to burnout in general, but also athletics. Like if you're not having fun, if you're not showing up, looking forward to it. Like I remember I was hurt. I was playing baseball. I was getting recruited to go play at the collegiate level. I was a pretty good athlete, but I was injured. And like, I didn't get along with my coach. I was a good kid. I'll put that in quotes, but like I didn't drink and party on a real like drinking and partying team. This was in high school. So like I didn't fit the culture. The coach and I did not see eye to eye. One of the coaches was my dad. We definitely didn't see eye to eye. Like I was injured, and I just remember being like, I'm not looking forward to this season. Like I put in all this work. I put in all this effort. I was rehabbing. I was doing all this stuff to be healthy enough to play. And like, I wasn't excited to play. And like, that's what burnout looks like, where it's just like the joy is sucked out of it. You're doing it. And then circling back to more present times, like going through COVID was really just brutal. It's brutal for the athletes because for a lot of them, their number one coping skill was sports, and that was taken away. It's brutal for athletic trainers getting up at 5:30 to run COVID tests and swabs and all that stuff, tiring, but also then like, is this safe? Is this okay? I was doing mental health at the time, so I was miserable. And it's like, you do all this fighting for this job, and then you step away from it. You're like, oh, dang, like that wasn't good for me for a long time. Like that, as you said, that reset, that breath of fresh air is really helpful to kind of take stock and reevaluate like where are your ethics, where are your morals, what's going to be like congruent for what you want to be doing.
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing is game day. Like I love game day. I'm so excited. It's awesome to like watch people play that have maybe been out for a couple of weeks and they're finally getting back at it. So that for me is like the big tell. Like if I'm dreading going to a game, barring like horrible weather or something like that, if I'm dreading a nice, beautiful, like sunny afternoon football game, like that's when I know it's like time to go. But like even this weekend, I had a really long week. I was really tired, and we got on the football field and we got our first win of the season, and I was pumped. Like it all like pays off in that time. And then Sunday, normally my day off, I went and traveled with softball, and like I was still excited to watch softball and watch these girls who had done their whole fall season, and this was their chance. So that is very much so for me. The tell is like when I don't want to go to a game anymore, like that's when it's time to give yourself a little check.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about mental toughness, because again, I think that's sports are so weird, and the stigma around mental health, but like everybody acknowledges that the mental part of the game is a big deal. And I was a pitcher playing baseball growing up. You were a pitcher. Let's talk about like how that gets talked about. How were you kind of coached? How did you kind of make sense of that as a player yourself when you're on the mound? Maybe you're struggling, you're not having a great game. Like, what do you kind of do as an athlete when you're out there?
That's a great question. Well, I haven't thought about playing sports in a while. I'm long retired. But it is a huge thing. As pitching especially is a big one, because I remember when I was in high school, I was really the only pitcher. So I think for me, that was what got my start, because I knew that no matter how shitty I threw that day, there was no one else to come in. Like, you just got to grit and bear it and figure it out and try and find another way to like beat a hitter, or at least, not let them hit another home run. And so I think for me, that was what kind of prepped me. And then college was just like a whole new ball game. Like, I would throw a great first 3 innings, and you'd get through the second time in the lineup and they would know what you're going to throw, because you haven't changed anything. And so I think just like every level, it just got a little bit harder. I think getting mentorship, or like even just like talking about the mental side of the game, is huge, because I feel like we didn't talk about it a ton, right? Like, we would go to practice, they'd say, be tough, be mentally tough, like figure that out. But I don't think I was given any like skills. Whereas like now our softball team, they do pitcher catchers meeting once a week in season, where they just do some sort of activity, whether it's team building, whether it's mental toughness, whether they listen to a podcast or watch a video and talk about it. But the mental side of the game is actually like discussed. And then again, we're very lucky. We have some sports psych interns that will do like individual training sessions with athletes. And we really give them a lot of information on like imagery and like mental reps and confidence, and these like marketable skills, like actionable items for them to kind of do in practice. That I think is a great resource and tool to use in sport, because you don't realize how much the mental side of it affects how you play. So I think a big part of it too is just having coaches that understand that. And like, if the team's having a bad like mental day and they can't figure it out, like, how can you as a coach shift this like practice and be like, all right, take a few minutes, discuss what's going on, come back in 5 minutes, and we're going to play better. Like, I don't know what you need to do, but whatever this is not working. And maybe give some of those actionable items and some of those skills that they can kind of use in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and you said mental reps, which was one of the things I talk about all the time, because athletes are so familiar with the repetition is important, and then like skipping the mental part. But you can sit down, you can visualize, you can do something that's good for your body, like rest and recovery, and still get your mental reps. You can watch film, you can do all these different things. So I think I love that. For me, working with athletes, that was always my in to get them thinking about their mental health, was like, well, you always say 90% of the game's mental, like, this is part of that. What does that look like? And so demystifying it, destigmatizing it, giving it, as you said, actionable items. Athletes want to practice something. They're used to reps. They're used to drills. If we give them mental drills, they'll do them. Like, that makes sense to them.
Yeah, and especially anyone who's injured, I'm always trying to get them to practice. Like, I want you there. Watch your teammate play your position and do that. Think about feeling your body doing that, and being able to get your mind to like feel those motions, watch it happen, is a lot more than sitting there and playing Candy Crush would be. So it's better than nothing. And then my biggest thing is trying to get them to do anything that they possibly can in practice, right? Like, I had a girl who was out with like an upper extremity injury. I'm like, you can run bases, get out there, do the team warm up, like move around, do something to move your body through space and get active and feel like you're a part of your team. Because a lot of the mental side of it too is inclusivity. So feeling like you're still part of your team is huge for not only healing, but like your own mental health, and kind of keeping eyes on the prize, right? If you're out there and you're dressed for practice, even if you can't go, you're going to feel like more of the team. If you can get in and help pick up balls or something like that and really feel included, that's a big part as well.
Yeah, for sure. And for a lot of athletes, if you're in concussion protocol or you've got, turf toe or whatever, like some of these aren't on crutches. Some of these people aren't in a boot. So like the difference between being visibly hurt and just being not cleared to play is different. So being included and doing what you can really helps kind of keep people from getting in their own heads about like, oh, my teammates are judging me or any of that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and especially concussions, that's such a huge one because everyone is so unique. I've worked with concussions that have lasted 3, 4, 5 months, and mental health affects it so much. So the more prone to depression, anxiety, ADHD, any of those things worsen your chance of post-concussion syndrome, which is just long-term symptoms. So being able to address that mental health aspect, even if it is like you need to have more appointments, right? If you're already seeing a provider, like, do we need to up those? Do we need to change the timing of it so that you're able to like be a little bit more focused on it? But really approaching like handling the mental health side, even if you don't have a diagnosis, right? Even if it's not something that severe, addressing the mental health can help improve the concussion symptoms, or at least know that they go hand in hand and that you have to like look at both. Because I think a lot of times that goes overlooked of like, we just see a number on a sheet, right? Every day they come in and they fill out this list and we're like, all right, well, you still have a little bit of a headache, blah, blah, blah. Well, can't play basketball today. Like, sorry, good luck. We'll try again tomorrow. And if you're not digging deeper and getting any more information, there's so many other like things that you're missing out on in terms of how you can help them and how they can help themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to avoid a concussion discussion because I think that's an extra hour on the podcast.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, I will say, for people who are maybe not in the know, or you're mad that your favorite fantasy football star is out this week with a concussion again. Like, the science behind it is we're constantly learning new things. It's such a weird, quirky kind of thing that we're still working really hard to unravel from the neuroscience perspective.
Oh yeah, so much of the perspective has changed even again from when I graduated. A new consensus statement came out this summer. When I was in school, it was like, lay in a dark room, don't talk to anyone for like 48 hours, don't look at your computer screen, don't do anything that might make you feel worse. Definitely don't do any physical activity. And now the research is like, you can go 48 hours where you don't do a ton, but after that, get on a bike, go on a walk. Like, any submaximal exercise is going to be great for you. Go to class, look at that computer screen, like, do things that are going to kind of like test you a little bit. So it might make you feel slightly worse in the moment, but as long as you come right back down, like, that's great for you. And so I think just seeing like how even just the treatment alone has completely flipped 180 is crazy to me. I'm very grateful for it. I've seen a lot better results of getting people moving and getting people active. And you're decreasing their deconditioning. So when they do come back, they feel better and they're in better shape. They're boosting their mood by letting them be able to do something other than like sit in a room and stare at a wall. I had concussions in college, and I remember laying on my couch just staring at the wall, not watching TV because my head hurt so bad, and knowing that like I could have been on a stationary bike, or I could have done something that might have made me feel better other than just like be miserable. So much new research. I'm excited to see where it goes, but also always scared because football is bad for the brain a lot of times. Like, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and recurring, the science around recurrence and stuff like that. We had an athlete who took a ball off of a bounce in a drill and got a concussion. And like, for most kids that happens. Like, I got hit in the head all the time as a coach. Like, you're just walking through the court or talking to somebody and an errant ball comes and hits you. And like, some bodies that's nothing and they respond appropriately, and some bodies that's going to be a concussion, and some bodies that's going to be a concussion where you're out for 3 months. So like, the variability of it is just crazy high.
Yeah. Well, and getting athletes, parents, coaches to understand that how hard they got hit is not gonna fully predict everything else. So like, getting someone to understand like they're still symptomatic, I can't let them play, and they're like, well, someone just hit him with a little elbow, like it wasn't that bad. And I'm like, I cannot predict any of this. All I can do is treat the person in front of me, how they're feeling, what they're saying today. And so much of it is subjective too. I'm relying on the athlete to be honest with me. I'm relying on them to tell me what symptoms they're feeling and use that to make my decision that could be life or death. So it's very stressful and very like intense, but it's another thing that I think with this generation that they're a little bit more understanding, and I think they value their body and their health a little bit more than maybe people 10, 15 years ago. I think so much of it was like sport or bust, and now people are realizing that like sports are for now, your body is forever. And so really seeing that small shift in kind of the generation and of like, no, Melissa, I would not lie to you about my symptoms. Like I understand how serious this is. I feel like I can take a little bit of like weight to that and be like, okay, I feel like I can trust them. I can make this decision confidently, where maybe 6 years ago, I don't know if I would trust it as much. Like I would just have to rely on my gut and my gut only.
Yeah. Yeah. On the flip side of it, in my line of work, I mean, it's fascinating. Like I assess for something like a history of concussions now when I work with couples, because sometimes that's going to explain or contribute to an explanation for why someone has anger issues or why they're so emotionally touchy on certain things. So like the science, not just for athletes, it's fascinating. That's where a lot of money is, NFL, studying concussions constantly. But it's one of those things where we're seeing some of the long-term fallout of these things too, and realizing, right, like you're saying, that your body is forever, like sports for now, body's forever. So it's on the flip side, on the back end, it's interesting to see the research that's being done as well.
Yeah. And I'm still dealing with people where this season is more important than having pain the rest of their life. And like, I can only do so much to convince you. But college athletics is wild because you're dealing with adults, right? Like on the one hand, you have one kid that says, I don't want to do this because my mom says no. And the other one that goes, well, I don't care. I'm gonna do what I want. Like my body, my choice. I'm an adult. I'm gonna do this. And if it's not a truly inherent risk for death, like there's only so much. If I say okay and a doctor says okay, like we just got to go for it and hope for the best and figure it out along the way. But so I try and at least have that like heart to heart of like, this could be a lifelong issue if you keep going. And they're like, yeah, no, I know. And I'm okay with that. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, that 18 to 22-year-old brain is in a developmental, somewhat impervious to long-term consequences stage still. So depending on that maturation process and where they're at in their development, I mean, 19-year-old Jeremy did a bunch of stupid stuff that 35-year-old Jeremy would not do. So
Amen.
Let's talk referrals a little bit, because that's really, I guess, kind of what I want to highlight is like you athletic trainers spend so much time with athletes. You see them every day, especially when they're injured, but out at practice, spending all this time with them, like really your role is not to be therapist, is not to be counselor, but is to find a good referral source and a good fit. So what do you kind of help the younger athletic trainers do? What have you done over your career to get more comfortable with that process? Kind of what's that look like for you?
Yeah. First thing, boundaries. Hard. Cannot recommend it enough. Boundaries. I did not have great ones when I was a younger athletic trainer, and it pushed me to my breaking point mental health wise, taking on the brunt of other people's mental health when I was absolutely not prepared for it. So any new student I work with, any new employee, like that is one of the biggest things I harp on is you can be a resource for them, but you should not be a counselor. You should not be a therapist. If it gets to a point that you feel like they are needing too much from you, you need to immediately refer. So I think that in the past, I have had an athlete that I knew had a history of like suicidal ideations and had opened up to me about some mental health stuff, and I just never cut it off. So I was getting texts in the middle of the night. It was like every time I saw this person's name pop up on my phone, I was like, okay, if I don't reply right now, like they're going to kill themselves and it is my fault. And so being able to like tell my stories to younger athletic trainers and like remind them how important it is to put like yourself and your mental health first is the biggest thing. And then from there, recognizing what needs to be referred. So kind of understanding, like, is it just general, like, well, I'm kind of struggling with school, but I'm doing okay. Or is it, I feel like I can't get through my day without crying, or I can't get out of bed. I don't want to do anything anymore. And really listening for some of those like red flag type things that could warrant a referral. And then I just always be as blunt as possible. I think kind of like like sneaking around the answer or sneaking around the questions or being like just very vague is not helpful to anyone. Where I would always just be like, okay, have you seen a mental health provider in the past? Is that something that interests you? Would you like me to connect you to our resources on campus? And I've reached out directly to our counseling services and been like, hey, this is like the situation that I have. I think that they would benefit. Do you have any times available? So just knowing that, yeah, you can put on the card, right? You can give their little business card and be like, here, make an appointment. But if you pick up the phone and dial it for them, they're like 50% more. I mean, I made that number up, but they're definitely more likely to go and like have this help and get this information than if you were to just give it to them and they shove it in their backpack and don't do anything about it. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've found. And we are lucky to have counseling services on campus. But I have been at institutions in the past where we then have to deal with insurance and, you know, maybe I don't want my parents to know that I'm getting this, but I'm on their insurance. And so really just trying to reach out to even like county providers. I think I had an athlete use like free counseling services through a church at the like health department. And so like just knowing that you have resources out there that you don't have to be this person's mental health care provider. There are other options. So those would be kind of the big things of like setting boundaries and then kind of knowing when to refer, what your resources are that you have available. And if those aren't available, then what else can you find? What else can you kind of piece together?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those things too, where like the appropriate, I coached at the club and college level. Like I remember an athlete went down with an ankle, something, and like I'm a young coach. I had a playing career, but no experience around injuries. And like I helped my player off and got him to the bench and got him some ice and had no idea what to do. And like that's the same for something like a mental health crisis. Like if you're an athletic trainer, you don't have that frame of reference to know how to do that. You just say like, hey, let's look at what the support's available to you and get in touch. Even as a mental health professional, like sometimes I'm still recommending that somebody go to the hospital. Sometimes I'm still contacting parents to come pick a kid up. Like that's just the reality of it. But yeah, not taking on too much and knowing that sometimes that's actually doing more harm than good, because if I would have tried to tape a kid's ankle, not offering any actual support, I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, I think that's really key. It's tough. I mean, certainly as a mental health provider, I don't take insurance. So I see like some of it where it sucks to turn someone away who can't afford working with me or whatever, or to see like a campus counseling center that has a 4-week or 6-week waiting period. Like, again, there's an issue of support that's kind of systemic here, but being able to have those healthy boundaries and refer where appropriate, I think that's really the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perks, this was awesome.
Oh, thanks. I had
Do you want to plug in? Do you want to plug anything? I always give people the opportunity to plug anything.
No,
plug anything.
I don't have anything to plug.
All right. Yeah, it's kind of weird when I get college sports people on. Go follow Marquette Athletics? ?
TGOE, baby. Titan Green.
I at least was an alum for Marquette. I feel okay. I shun them and speak poorly of their counseling program, but if they're doing well in the NCAA tournament, I'm going to be like, oh, I went there. You know?
Yeah, of course.
That's me.
Yeah, I'm not really have anything. Support your athletic trainers, pay them. So,
yeah. Support your local brewers. They're awesome.
Oh yeah, we like that too.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, this has been great, Perks. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in. Once again, we'll be back next week with another new episode.